because I knew if I'm going to make a business out of this, like I kind of saw like this is the way you start it up. You don't go like put up your landing page and your prices and your all this BS. Like no, you start by talking to like 100 customers. So I don't know, I put together a list of 100 people who worked in the field of developer marketing. I start talking to as many as I can, get intros and whatever. And I'm just asking questions. There's no sale. There's nothing to like. I had no price, no deck, nothing to go from. I just started asking them.
But running a business is not. I always say it's a heartless business. Businesses are heartless. They don't care what time it is. That dragon never sleeps, and if it does, it's not going to do it on your time. You gotta tame it.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host David Sliman.
But yeah, it is funny, man, and it goes by quick. I can't believe our daughter is 24. But yeah, I remember coming off those weekends just being like a truck hit me and like, yeah, let's get back to work.
How does it feel having raised an adult? Like she is now an adult. And I mean 24, maybe she's has
she is. Believe me. Yeah, believe me. Our daughter was like, when she was young, she came out of the like womb reading, it was like one of those. That's how it felt. She was always been the overachiever. So she's made it easy on us as well, and she's kind of mature beyond her years. And then the youngest one. But yeah, to answer your question, it is because she got married last year, and it really is fulfilling to see them grow up and be, their own. Now going through life and going, how did they come back? And she goes, well, how did you do this? And how did you do that? Like, that's a really rewarding thing because she recognizes that it's tough. It's tough being an adult. You don't want to be an adult anymore. She's like, no, I don't want to be an adult.
I know. Well, I feel like that now.
I know, right?
There's days but I think that whole like, this is kind of a philosophical thing, but I think my wife and I talk about it a lot. Like, what you realize as they go from little bitty kids to like slightly older, mine are still young, but slightly older, is like they're becoming their own person, and they are splitting off from, diverging from what you want them to be more and more every day. And you have to let go of the what I wanted you to be kind of idea and just let them be, right? And that's a really hard thing to grasp because it's kind of like, I mean, it's like letting go of a piece of yourself and being like, I have no control over that thing anymore. It's now its own entity that I can't influence really like I wanted to. It's weird.
It really is. And welcome to Unfinished Business, everybody. Karl and I is just going to roll here, and we're talking about family and kids. How old are your kids, Karl?
So yeah, 2 and 5. So we're down in the thick of the young days, and the 5-year-old's the one that he's got his own ideas about what he wants to do, how he wants to spend his time, and it's getting more and more every year.
It's gonna get bigger. It's funny because I played football in college, and our middle son's a good athlete, and he played lacrosse and everything. And then our youngest son, really, when he was younger, he was kind of in the sports, but he wasn't. And he's a big kid too. And I was just like, I was hoping he'd play football, but I was like, I gave that up. I was like,
right, you got to let it go,
sports, right? or football or any sports in general. I was like, if he plays, great. If he doesn't, he doesn't. I just let that go. And last year he came to me and he goes, hey, I want to play tackle football this year. And I'm like, seriously? And I didn't know I was going to be, but he really enjoyed it. He really loved it. But yeah, you're right. They're their own independent beings. And as they get older and even at 5, they start develop, especially 5. 5 is a really cool age because they start developing that personality. Yeah. And you really see them really molding themselves, but it goes by quick, man. It does. It goes by really quick.
It is fun though to see them have their own personalities and things that again they like to do, and we can do things together now. The 2-year-old is like, he's just a little, he's fun, but he's like funny more than anything. And then the 5-year-old, like, we can actually do projects together. We can go places together, and he appreciates it and stuff. I do love that about it. But yeah, the control thing is hard. I think this is something I'm learning every year in both the business and the kids and the family and my partnership and marriage. And it's like, all of it is just an exercise in letting go of control of things and being at peace with the way things are. And then, doing what I can to influence the things I can, and then letting the rest go. That's just such that feels to me like the big life lesson I'm trying to learn right now.
Dude, I still struggle with that, right? Like, there's this part of me that you feel, it's going to work out, but in the same light, it's like you get pinged with something and you're like, wow, I got to jump on that. No, you don't got to jump on. You don't have to jump on it now. You have to like work it out and just let it. It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
especially when you're on the gas for so many
Yeah.
years, or you're pushing through, right? And there's some things, see, on the opposite of that too, there are some things that that you do when you are focused on it, you can control it.
Yep.
So it's a tough balance. Like you
It
have to
is.
choose your battles, so to speak,
Yep.
right? Yeah, you
Totally.
have to choose your
Yeah,
battle.
so hard. I mean, yeah, because you're right. Like those of us who are pretty, and most, entrepreneurs, pretty ambitious, pretty like driven, self-disciplined type people, and not all of us, but a lot of us tend towards that side of things, right?
Yeah,
And so we're used to being in control of our own bodies, our own minds, our own, like everything around us, our jobs, our careers, that all feels in control. And then you get into like entrepreneurship, and something happens, like the market around you just implodes, and all of a sudden you have to lay off half your people. And it was like there's nothing, literally nothing you could have done to
yeah,
prevent like that sort of
yeah,
macroeconomic force, but it's going
yeah,
to happen to you at some point in your journey. And you just have to be, I don't know, to me it's all that, those kind of ups and downs, they feel like training. There's no real end goal. It's just like it continues to build this mental resiliency that's going to make me better at this as it goes for the next 10, 20, 30 years. But
yeah. It's
we'll
a
see.
great conversation, right? And I think you have to. And listen, I've been in those situations where or laying off the department, so to speak. But you have to, I think what I always tried to keep in perspective was, okay, what's the long term? Like, how is this? Okay, we might have to cut out a department of 10 or 12 people, but what is that going to do for the rest of the organization, and how is it going to strengthen? And it's not easy, believe me, because you develop these relationships with people and personalities, and it's not easy at all. Um, but running a business is not. I always say it's a heartless business. Businesses are heartless. They don't care what time it is. That dragon never sleeps, and if it does, it's not going to do it on your time.
Right. Right.
You
And
gotta tame
yeah,
it.
I
And
think,
actually, you
yeah,
can just
yeah,
hang. If you're just hang on, I think
yeah,
you're
yeah.
okay sometimes. But
Yeah, and I think it's hard in a way that was different than I anticipated when I was going into starting my own business. I always assumed starting, yeah, I think people, talk a lot about the hard parts of starting a business being like long hours and working hard, and that part didn't scare me, right? So like, you go into this and it's like, oh, I can work hard. I can do long hours. I'm pretty smart. I can, whatever. And then you
yeah,
get in there and it's like it's not that's hard. That part's easy. The hard part is the mental, like, just blockers that you put up for yourself, or the fear that you face every day that you might not make payroll this month, or you might not be able to hire that person that you've been promising a job to. You might have to like let that big client go because they're just against your values. Like, so
yeah,
those are the hard things. The like, and they're not hard in a way that I can't even express that to someone who's not an entrepreneur and get them to understand. They just say, well, I don't get it. Like,
yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't make sense. So it's just a unique kind of hard because you're making all these really big, impactful decisions every day. And again, you can learn to appreciate it. You can learn to appreciate the hard things. That's why I really try to push myself to like, this is hard. That's good. That means I'm growing. Like, go push through the
Yes,
hard thing. But
yes.
it's very hard to get to that. And I don't always feel that. That's just like in the ideal world, I get there.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, it's such a great perspective, right? Like if you can earn the right to get to that point, and almost, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's like there's certain things you can control, and there's others. And there were certain times where it wasn't easy, but I learned to embrace the difficult moments, because I knew
Yep.
what happens is you understand that it's only going to make you better,
Yep.
especially, and you're younger than I am, and when I look back on it now, and especially the work that I do now with the consulting, where I was doing inside out work so many years, building in organizations and all that, and now I can look outside in. Like, really, that's what I have really taken a lot of from this, is to be able to go in and talk with a CEO or a business leader or somebody in a leadership position and say, you know what? I was there, and I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to tell you what happened, right? And
Yep.
if it, there were times, listen, man, there were times I got my ass kicked and I lost money doing certain things, and it wasn't as economical. But really, and then there were times where it was really successful and it worked out really
That's
well,
right.
but you don't really, but what it comes down to is that I can explain that journey now. And you can't put a price on that.
No, you can offer a level of perspective that you couldn't have offered from, purely being an outsider or someone who looks at this stuff in academic theory, because again, like if you look at I used to work with a business coach and he kind of expressed this to me. And I think this was really helpful. It's like, if you look at, say, like the 10-year growth of a stock, you look at point A and point B and it looks like it grew, like you draw a straight line because you're looking at a 10-year graph. But the reality is no business grows like that. It doubled one year, then it cut in half for 2 years, and then it doubled another year. And then so especially small businesses, we tend to be especially volatile, but like that's the real way businesses grow. So like people get down on themselves, entrepreneurs, about, oh, I'm just flat in revenue, can't get anything out of the way. And sometimes they just think, well, this isn't going to work. They throw in the towel or they sell it or whatever. But it's like, no, growth happens in these weird fits and starts. And you have to be willing to like ride those waves, or else just, don't get into this. This is not a good profession if you're not willing to take like the high highs and the low lows.
The controlled chaos. It's funny because that's like my logo is the arrow behind there. You can't see it starts off to the left there, it goes up and then it goes down and it goes up. That's the truth. It's
because that's the way it goes.
It is a damn and I was lucky enough, earlier in my career to have somebody who talked to me about that. They said, listen, you're going to make revenue, but if you want to get high, you're actually going to have to invest back into the business. You're probably going to drop your income level. And then, but what happens is you're going to spiral up at that point. So I think it's really, really great. So listen,
or you don't, and you learn something. Sorry, we'll get back on topic, David.
Yeah, but let me say hi to everybody. Listen, Karl Hughes, him and I met the first time, I don't know, maybe Karl met about 3 or 4 weeks ago or whatever it was, but immediately hit it off. As you can see here, we just jumped right in, and I love this actually style. Because I think it's great just to have conversations. There was someone recent, and a few times when I interview guests, was like, "Do you have questions and lists?" And honestly, I do my research on your backgrounds, but I really like to have this more of a free flowing conversation. And like I said, when we spoke the first time, we really hit it off. And everybody out there, I'm going to let Karl give you a little bit about his background, but this guy is a fantastic entrepreneur. And been looking forward to having him on the show to talk about his journey. And he's in the thick of his journey right now. But Karl, you can back up. I mean, you were a software engineer for about 10 years, right? And doing your thing. And then you came to this moment where you're like, I'm going to do my own thing. And that's what this show is about. It's for people out there who are in the business world, who, they could be a business leader working for an organization, or it's great to speak to people who have thought about the idea of getting into business for themselves, or maybe that are in the thick of it right now, or have been there and done that. And we jump into the minds of guests like yourself. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into this. And if you can give our guests a little bit of background about yourself, that'd be great. And then we'll dive in. I want to dive into that first business, and then we'll talk about the next business and go from there.
Yeah. It's been a long 4 years, or 5 years now. And it's amazing how much you can transform in 5 years when you take these big leaps into like something like entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be this. It could be something big in, another way, like becoming a full-time artist. I'm sure you have just as much of transformational growth, but whatever. So yeah, about 5 years ago, I was a software engineer. I'd been the first engineer at a couple of early stage tech startups here in Chicago. And that was a really good look at how running a business goes. Is like, I think one of the best things you can do if you're, for me at least, was look like learning to be an entrepreneur by sitting right next to somebody who was. And sure, I didn't have all the upside, but I also didn't have any of the downside, to worry about either. And so I collected a paycheck and got to learn right alongside people who were raising money and, building a company and hiring people. And I was hiring people too. And so great way to learn. The pandemic hit, and the startup I was working for was at a bad point in their funding cycle. And so they started to like kind of shut down and cut, my hours as well as everybody else's, just to try to stay alive long enough to sell. And I simultaneously figured, well, I got to think of something else to do. So the world was crazy then. I mean, y'all remember 2020. It was like nobody knew how long this was going to go on, what was going to happen. So I took, my skills I had as a software engineer, and then started writing about software engineering and some of the technical things I'd learned and was exploring and things like that, companies would reach out to me then to start writing for them. And I discovered kind of, through just random chance that like, oh, there's a whole market of companies that want to pay software developers to write content for them because they sell tools to software developers.
Yeah.
So the use case is, if you're a web hosting company and your primary customer is going to be some DevOps team that's all software engineers or whatever, you've got to write good content that appeals to that technical audience, and it's got to be technical. It can't be marketing fluff because they can see through that. So they hire people like myself who are software engineers that maybe want to write on the side. And what I learned after doing that 2 or 3 times for a few companies, and then I started talking to dozens of customers, because I knew if I'm going to make a business out of this, like I kind of saw like this is the way you start it up. You don't go like put up your landing page and your prices and all this BS. Like, no, you start by talking to like 100 customers. So I don't know, I put together a list of 100 people who worked in the field of developer marketing. I start talking to as many as I can, get intros and whatever. And I'm just asking questions. There's no sale. There's nothing to like, I had no price, no deck, nothing to go from. I just started asking them, what are you doing to create content? How much are you charging, or how much are you paying for it? How much would you pay if you could get better content? Is it meeting your expectations, whatever? And I just found this huge disparity. People were wanting to pay more if they could find better quality, couldn't find it. And they were really struggling to find writers and the technical people that could actually do this. But also they were struggling with like, market awareness. There's so many problems like around it. Anyway, so big problem space. And they all had money because they're venture funded. These companies are growing quickly. They need to invest in growth. So I started up Draft.dev, which was initially me freelance writing essentially. And then within a few months, it was me hiring freelance writers, and I became kind of a editor. I realized I hate editing. I became more of a salesperson, hired an editor. And so, as I had been the first employee seeing these companies grow quickly as startups with outside funding. I didn't have outside funding, but I was growing pretty quickly because of customer demand. And so I just followed the playbook that venture funded companies use to grow, which is, you define roles, you hire people, you try to keep revenue or cash flow ahead of spending and just go. And it grew super fast. The first full year we were in business, we did $1 million in revenue. The next year was like $2.5 million in revenue. So like just blew up. I mean, like I did not expect it. No way I could have like, if you gave me 10 businesses to start again, I don't think I'd do that one more time. Like, I think that was like fluke, but it was a great fluke. And look, I mean, a lot of business success is timing. And I think if you look at 100 success stories, chances are they all had dozens and dozens of failures along the way in there, and they hit one really big home run in the middle of it. And so that, honestly, that was my, like, again, that first couple of years of Draft felt like a home run. And there's a lot to go from there, but I'll just
I want to back up though with one thing you said, because I'm finding this out more, and I didn't do this enough. And the more that I've been working with CEOs and the more that I've been working with business leaders, there's a thread here that you did that I see. I wish I would have done more in my earlier career. And that was because sometimes I would shoot now, ask questions later, right? It's like, hey, does this make sense? Great. You know what? Let's run with it. Let's make it happen. And then work the process back. Like I did that a lot earlier in my career. But what you did is you asked a lot of questions before you went in. And we had another guest on it. He's the CEO of Dirty.dough, a franchise. But it's the same thing. He would just call everybody and just start asking questions.
Yeah.
And once he got the answers to the questions he was asking, and probably just like you, then you could really formulate a strategic plan on what you want to accomplish and find that niche too, which you found a huge niche. I mean, you're putting content together for a very, how do I want to put it? It's a very technology, right? It's geared around development and tech, and when you're layering in a complication on top of a complication, I mean, you really got to know your lane. And
yeah,
talk to me about that process you went through, and
Yeah. So I recognized early in my engineering career that I was never going to be the best engineer on paper. Like I barely made it through school. Like, I was not that kind of engineer that was going to be the one in the textbook. Right.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
what I was is good enough to communicate with the people who were, right. And
right.
really good at communicating the technical things over to the business side. So I realized like my lane, where I'm going to be the most successful in my career, whatever that sweet spot is, between technology, analytical brains, and the business, like that drives the economic engine. And if I sit in
Yes,
that middle space, I'm going to be really really successful in whatever I did. So I
yeah,
was quickly went into management as an engineer because I could speak to the business about the technical things in a way they understood, and I could speak to the engineers in a way that made them understand why the business was doing
yeah,
things the way that
great.
they were. So anyway, all that to say, I knew my strength was communication and not necessarily technical chops. So I went into this like, I'm going to start a business. I need to be the communicator, use that strength, right? So I read a book probably in college called, which is a classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? And the one of the there's 5 or 6 takeaways in the book. It's a really simple little cheesy book, but it seriously did change the way I communicate with people because I'm a very procedural and analytical person. Like it's basically like get people talking about themselves. It's all they care about. I mean, you run a podcast. This is like it's easy to get guests that want to talk about themselves, right? Like we all
Right,
do.
right,
Everybody
right.
wants to talk about themselves. So what's cool is you basically the trick for me with sales. I don't know sales. I don't know how to close deals. I'd never sold anything in my life in a formal sense, and so for me, it was just go into the conversation being honest and interested in what the person cares about and get them talking about something they're jazzed about or excited about or nervous about or that gets them going, right? And if I could do that, that would build rapport. They would ask me eventually, which always happened at the end of these conversations. They'd say, so what are you doing here? What are you selling? What are you asking all these questions for? And I go, oh yeah, I'm starting eventually it became, I'm starting an agency. We create, scaled up content for dev tools companies that want to reach software engineers. And they're like, oh, tell me more. And this like, boom, he just invited me to a sales pitch when I didn't even go into it with that intent. And I think that was, to me, like seeing that several times happen, realize that's my style. Like I'm gonna sell that way, and I still do. I mean, I'm not as much of a salesperson day to day, but like in the things I do around business acquisitions now, it's like that's my sale. I don't go in and try to sell them anything. I just ask them enough questions to where I figure out, is there a pain point here? They'll ask me something, and then we're off to the races. So
Yeah,
anyway, it's just using the strengths I have instead of trying to like follow a playbook that somebody else gave me.
yeah. I got to tell you, and listen, I do feel like there's a format, or if you have a structure in your process, that's great. But one of the most important steps in the sales process, and it's overused, but it's called discovery step, and which is what you're talking about. But genuinely, just trying to have a conversation to understand what the challenges are for your prospect, or even just about what they do. I mean, I was actually taught, I was in very early in my career, it's called the warm up, because you just want to warm up to somebody and you want to understand if you can help. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what they call it. When I
yeah, yeah.
first got into sales, they called it. But it's so true. And you come from a place of strength from there, because now there's no pressure where you're just trying to jam something down someone's throat, or you're just trying to
Totally.
sell an ad or sell this or sell that. But what you do is you come from a place of strength and trust. And when people can trust you, that's like half the battle. When they feel like
Yeah.
they can trust you,
Yep.
it's half the battle.
There,
And then obviously,
there's like, yeah, again, this goes back to when friends influence people. People want to talk about
yeah,
themselves,
great
so
book.
get them talking about themselves as long as you can. And then the other one is like, I think this is an art of war or something, right? Like know more about your enemy than they know about you. So going to that conversation, I would have researched this person, obviously, like anybody, and so I'd have a little idea of their background. Then they're telling me just tons of information about their problems, the company organization, how budgetary things get done. They're telling me all this stuff for free, and I haven't had to like give them any information about what I even do. So they have no context to like sort of filter this through yet. And obviously that sales tactic doesn't work once you're later on and you're like, your company has an actual brand and landing page and they sign up for discovery calls. It's different then. But like
Yeah,
we're in the early days where you have like all you have are these unfair advantages that you won't be able to use later. So use them, like use the information asymmetry, use
use
the
it.
fact that like it's I think that's another like entrepreneurial truism I just picked up from talking to enough people is like every entrepreneur uses their unfair advantage. The really good ones figure out how to use it really, really well. They don't try to paper up all their weaknesses and become something they're not. They just lean really hard into the stuff they're really good at.
Yeah, it's such a good. We got to clip that back because that is so good, right? If you just lean on what you're good at. And I was looking at some of your content, and I like the one about the cold sales trap, right? Can you speak to? I thought it was really good,
Yeah.
by the way. And I think it speaks a little bit to what we're talking about here. But you talk about the cold sales trap. Can you share when you wrote that? And I thought it was really good.
So again, I'll give a little bit of context here because I come from a world of software engineers, and often there's software engineers have ideas for software that they could create on their own that would be better than the incumbents, right? That happens all the time. Like software engineers build all these open source tools they share for free with people. Some of them make companies around it.
Yeah.
Often where they struggle is actually reaching a market because they don't know anything about marketing or positioning or sales, any of that. They kind of think that if I build a really good product, people will just come. And I'll just tell people and they'll immediately just start signing up and paying me money. So that never happens, especially in a saturated market now. So what happens though is they think I'll just spend a ton of time building a really good product and then I'll cold email 1,000 people and I'll get my first customers. And whether that's a service or product, whatever it is, if cold email is your go to market, you get really biased results as to whether this thing is actually a good idea. Because sure, you might be able to get some people on a call, but they're probably the worst prospects you could get. They came in with zero trust. They came in not knowing who you are, no reason to work with you. Like you might have gotten lucky with timing that they decided to answer, or they're just kind of these annoying time waster type customers that like to just get on calls just because they got an invite to a call, just like all sorts of like noise in the data.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a network of, say, like, again, this is my playbook was go to my network of, I don't know, 10, 20 people and then build it out from there. You go to your network and you expand that network organically. Every one of those intros comes in with a certain degree of trust. So when I was going in asking questions of people, there wasn't this context of, oh, I just sent you a cold email out of the blue. You've never heard of me. No one knows me. And I'm asking you a bunch of questions. People aren't going to answer these questions as candidly. But if it was a warm intro from somebody who I spoke at a conference with several years ago, or, we know somebody mutually on LinkedIn, and I was, looking into your company, I thought it was really cool. Would love to just ask you some questions. That's super easy to get people to open up. So context matters. And I think, again, if you're early on, you get poisoned, your data gets poisoned by just having only cold outreach. And even now, I mean, we do cold outreach at both my companies, but
Yep.
it's certainly, we have to look at the close rates and the like response rates very differently from what we do with referrals or organic inbound traffic from search and things like that. It's just, the
Yeah.
numbers are
I
just
mean,
going to be wildly different.
and even it was, I mean, are cold outreach is even worth it? And obviously, you're still saying yes, they are, right? But you
Yeah,
just
I
have
think
to be
once,
really, you got to watch
right.
the
Well,
data.
they're early on, you're trying to figure out where is the customer pain point and how am I really solving it? That's really what you care about. So cold email assumes you already know a customer pain point and you know this person has it and you can reach them at the exact moment when they're going to be looking for solutions. You don't have all that in the early days.
Yes.
So cold email works really well when you have a very specific offering for a very specific type of persona and you know that they're looking. So Draft.dev, again, we offer now, we have it's a very clear pitch. We offer content marketing services for companies trying to reach software developers and data engineers. And so I can go to a head of marketing at a data engineering focused company that just raised $100 million. And I could say, hey, you guys are probably looking to invest in content. And I'm like 50-50 shot if I'm right. Would love to help you all out. Just, hop on a call, work with 3 or 4 of your biggest competitors. We know how to do this at scale. We've grown traffic X, Y, and Z. Like, boom, that's way easier to sell on a cold
Yeah.
email or at
Because
least get on a
you set
call
it
than
up.
somebody who's just started and is like, hey, I'm trying to learn about the industry. Like, could you help me out? Maybe we can get on a call.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
who the hell
All
are
right.
you? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And I want to stress this for those of you out there who are thinking about getting into business yourself, or maybe you've got a business going and it's just not clicking at the speed you want. Just get a list of your contacts of people that you know and start having conversations. It doesn't have to be, hey, do you want to buy something? It can just be, hey, like one of the things that I did when I first started consulting, because I was in the grind for so many years, right? And just lost touch with a lot of people through the years who I developed relationships with. And one of the first things that I did when I started consulting was I just set up calls with people who I haven't talked with in years. And genuinely,
Yep.
I really just wanted to see what was going on. And then I had then obviously the conversation would, well, what are you doing now? And then it's like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And great. There was no intention. I'm just letting you know. And then someone calls and says, hey, I saw you were doing some stuff, or I heard you were doing some or sales development stuff. and I get a call from a guy who I'd known for like 14 years, and started working together on some stuff. So
Totally.
it's just it's a really good approach. We all have a network, especially nowadays, and we
And
all
if you
can tap
don't,
into
your
that.
mission zero is to go start building
Go
it,
start
right? Like
right. Go start
I think
building a network.
that's
Right.
that to me is the obvious takeaway. It's like if
Yeah.
you're like, well, I don't have a network, nobody knows me, I don't know anybody, and I'm like, well, there's your first step. Like, go do that for 2 years and come back, you'll start a good business. Like,
Yeah.
but I mean, I go back and forth on this because again, like I don't like to give universal advice because I think there are 1,000 ways to do it because there's 1,000 different people who've done this
Sure.
stuff successfully. But I do think that the entrepreneurs I talk to, I mean, probably 90% of them, their first 5 customers were people in their network, former employers, former,
Yeah.
employees, like
Yeah.
people they knew super intimately. And then it just snowballs from there if you've got a good service or good offering for the right kind of customer base you can reach.
Absolutely. All right. So now let's back up. I want to back up. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I want to talk about how you scaled this thing because you went from like 0 to 2.5 million in about 2 years, you said.
Yeah.
And because we have this control factor sometimes, and we were talking about that earlier about, you know, having our hands in everything as we're growing. When did you realize, like, listen, I want to grow this thing? Or you obviously grew fast, how to start delegating, bringing in people, scaling this thing? Because I know you talk about scale a lot, actually, and you have a good experience with that. But can you speak to scaling a business that's growing, and maybe some tips
Yeah.
and things that you could put out there for somebody who's growing?
Yeah, so there's so first of all, I mean, you have to have demand. Like in other words, there has to be something growing before you can start to do all this. But once you do start to see that, like then there's a playbook. So there's a book called The E-Myth Revisited. This kind of, I mean, a classic entrepreneurial book. And the analogy that he uses is if you're a baker, your job as an entrepreneur who's a baker is not to bake pies. It's to build what he calls franchise prototype, I think is what his wording is. But basically build the playbook that tells 10 other people how to bake pies and go sit back a level above them and just make sure they all, follow the playbook and like quality control. And then eventually you hire somebody to do quality control. You sit back another layer. Like you just build these layers into the process and business. And you build a process at each layer. And it's a very straightforward. It's like, it sounds so simple. It really is pretty simple. So what I did was from day one of Draft.dev, I tracked my time. I'd say, I want to spend half my time on growth. So sales and marketing and outreach type efforts, and half my time on client work initially. And then once my client work time got filled up and I was spending, whatever, if I'm working a 40-hour week, 20 hours a week on client work, I've got to hire somebody or else I can't take on new clients, and I'm not going to stop doing the growth efforts. So clients were going to be coming. So two things happen. I can, I'm still doing the growth efforts. I'm still getting an interest. So I raise prices and then simultaneously start to hire people. So I've got the margin to afford those people and still make my own money. So those two things have to happen simultaneously, basically. And there's two things that block entrepreneurs there. It's like, one is raising prices is scary because you might either lose some clients or people say no that would have said yes when you had lower prices. Yes, that's true, but that's what you have to have. You have to just trust that your demand gen continues to build interest and like over time, so you still have that going. And then the other thing is hiring people is scary because now the work will not be as good as when you did it, and it absolutely is not. So my guesstimate is that you hire somebody in and they do the work at best on day one. They're doing 50 to 75% of the capability of the entrepreneur. Like, the first articles I had written by people, I had to completely rewrite. They were just 0% of what I could have done. It was terrible. And then, I learned from that, like what to look for in a writer. And some of the writers I got could do it half as well as me or 3/4 as well as me. And I'm like, great, that saved me a ton of time. Now I don't have to spend 8 hours writing that thing. I spend 2 hours cleaning it up. That'll work. And then eventually it's like, I hire an editor who does all that cleanup then. And so I tracked my time. I had these buckets of writing, editing, client work, sales, account management. I start to look at where am I spending my time? Those are where I'm going to start hiring fractional people. And then I start to look at like what things really drain my energy. So stuff like account management, really big drain for energy for me. And that's like in any client service business, that's the basic back and forth of here's your article. Oh, you didn't like that part? We'll go send it to the writer to go revise it. Here's your article again. Oh, you didn't like that other part. Okay, here's this. Oh, your product change, just back and forth bullshit. Just, it sucks.
Yes.
Like it's never ending. And in a client service business, it's super important that you do it well. So you need somebody who you can trust to do it. But does it need to be me, the owner, every single time? I've learned no. I mean, as long as the person who's doing it is good and responsive and understanding and communicates well, I don't need to be the one bearing the mental load of clients being a little bit unhappy about an article. And I find that it's such a distraction that it really is like, it holds me back personally. So that kind of thing, like detail work, like editing, client back and forth, like account management, writing, all that stuff I got off my plate pretty quickly because it was just such a big time and energy suck.
Mental drain.
Whereas,
Jeez.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then eventually the sales too. I mean, so all of it, like, but
Yes.
again, you just build up this like, this is how many hours a week I spend on it. I assume someone else will come in and spend more hours because they're not as good and they won't be as good. But like, as long as it's not so bad that it tanks our reputation, it doesn't really matter. And if nothing else, I'll learn from it. As long as I continue building in the pipeline of new clients, it doesn't matter if we churn half of them over the course of a year. You know, it's like we're learning. Learning is the optimal outcome, not sticky revenue on day one. Like that's going to come. We're going to get better at that. So I just really had this like, it doesn't matter that much attitude, and that was a good thing at the time.
Yes, and listen, if you haven't read the book E-Myth or E-Myth, I'm dating myself. I read E-Myth first, and they did E-Myth revisited it after that. But either one is good. But check out that. I read that same book very early in my career. And it was like, bam! It sounds so easy, right? And I really built my businesses on I was in the marketing and advertising space. And I always said, all right, how many clients do I need to pay to this person? Okay, now I can hire the administrator. Now when I hire the administrator, that's going to take more time off my plate. I'm not going to be doing anything there. And then you just kind of level everything up at that point. You start, it's amazing how quickly things can grow if you get some of the right people in the seats. And you're going to listen, like you said, I think there's a patience factor too, because they're not going to do it like you're going to do it. But if you can communicate and really be clear on those objectives, I think it works out. So I think that's great conversation on the scaling side of it. So then you've got your business, which is growing really, really well, right? And then you're like, okay, so Draft.dev is doing well. And now you're like, you know what, man, I'm going to start building a portfolio for myself, which I love.
Yeah.
Which I love because there's some synergy there. And I like what you're thinking. But realistically, talk to me about the next venture and explain to everybody where you were at. And what happened.
Well, so I got to a point, again, I was very, I am nothing if not disciplined and organized. And so I was very strict about this. Like I'd set very specific goals around how much time I wanted to spend on different things over, the course of the first 2 or 3 years at Draft. And so I was like, I want to take a whole month off when my second kid is born. And that would have been the 2022, October of 2022, to take 30 days off from a business that's less than 2 years old, as an owner is like pretty big deal to me. I mean, that was like, if I could do that in 2 years, I'd be pretty happy with myself. And I was like, that's kind of like the whole goal I had for myself from the start. I didn't have any bigger aspirations. It was just like be able to take a month off at a time. That sounds like a cool goal, right?
Cool goal.
So,
really cool goal.
So I got there, I did it, and I didn't check in for a month. I had no phone calls, no emails, like nothing for a month. And it's like, I came back and I was like, well, wait, I got to do something else with my life. Like I'm only, 34. Like what is there left? And so, even though, the business is doing well, it's spinning off profit and I'm, like taking no time in it for periods of time, at least, I was like, I need something bigger to work on. I thought about, a couple different extremes. I thought about selling it maybe and going and taking some time off and starting something new. And then I'm like, yeah, but this thing is like here, it's cash flowing. The multiples on service businesses are not amazing. And it's only 2 years old. So like people are going to want to see more history before they buy it. It's like, what if I just double down essentially and say like, start building more of these things? So started talking to people about this more and I reading around more and just thinking about it. And what I realized was, I could start new businesses from scratch. But again, I didn't think out of 10 more shots, I'd hit one more that grew this fast. So I'd be spending years in each of these, just trying to get them up to like, a couple million in revenue. Whereas what if I just go out and leverage what I've learned and the cash flow I have to buy other companies that are kind of stuck for one reason or another. So I read this book, again, I'm going to keep throwing books into each section, but these were really these were really like kind of like the catalyst books. And so I read this book called Buy Then Build, which is it kind of got me into this whole, and I sort of started to learn about this whole community of people who do search funds, which is an MBA thing. So a lot of people who come out of their MBA programs, they don't want to go start a small business because that's, again, they're a little more like they have, hundreds of $1,000s in debt behind them. They have, big fancy credentials. So instead what they do is they raise some money from investors and they go buy a $1 to $10 million business or something. And they go run it as a small time CEO. And so I was like, well, I could do that just on a smaller scale with my own cash flow. And like, I don't have to go to investors yet. And I can just use debt like they do. It's the same basic premise. And so I got together with a friend of mine who we'd been talking for years about doing something together. And we finally were like, okay, this might be it. And I was like, let's go out and buy 10 small niche businesses like Draft.dev, figure out how to make them run better over the next 10 years and build ourselves a portfolio of these like small, like niche service businesses. Because I think, again, a lot of entrepreneurs are really good at that tactician level 0 to 1 phase where they're having to do all the work and they really struggle to let go and give the rest to their team and step back, right? And let it grow on its own. So these businesses like that, they get stuck at, for a service business, is probably 1 to 3 million in revenue, where the owner has no more bandwidth left to do any more work. And they can't really train people because they think what they're doing is so specialized. They have no sales channels that are really reliant on anything but them. And so I think there's a great opportunity here. The other cool thing now that I've explored this more is like nobody buys these small service businesses. They just die if the owner decides to stop working on them. Yeah. So the private equity doesn't start to buy stuff until you get to 5 or 10 million at least in revenue, and usually it's bigger than that for service companies. And so there's nobody buying these little agencies. There's a ton of them out there. They often the owners are struggling. They're ready to get out, but they have no way to get out of it without just working themselves more or finding somebody like me to sell to, or maybe passing on to an employee or something, or shutting it down. So anyway, I think it's a cool opportunity. So we went and bought.
What is this, Carl? What is this called again? Nail it again. What is it called again? Because I've never heard of this, and I think you jumped into it. But what's the platform called again? With the ownerships and one that you looked at?
So you mean for like the whole system? There's this search fund model. Yeah. So again, if you go to an MBA program, I did not, but I actually do some guest lecturing at Northwestern's MBA program, so I got to know some people out there who do this. But there's this whole thing that's been going on for the last 20 years, where MBAs will go put together what they call a search fund to search and then buy a small business where the owner wants to exit, and maybe it's smaller than private equity would be buying, and they think they can take it to the next level. So a lot of times these are very traditional, old school brick and mortar businesses, like let's say a laundromat or painters, local painters or plumbers or something. But it could also be digital agencies like we're looking at. So that getting into that taught me there's a whole playbook for this. And then what it also, once you meet like 5 or 10 people who are doing this kind of thing, you start to pick up like, and this has always been my pattern. It's like you pick up the best practice by talking to 10 people who do this thing, because they'll say, 8 things that overlap and 2 or 3 things that don't each. And then you say, okay, well, the 8 things that they said that all overlap, that's probably best practice. And like, just, we should do it. The 2 things they didn't, you can pick and choose those depending on your style. And like, those are a little bit more whatever. So that was my formula for coming up with this. And then we put together kind of a plan for how to do it. And we bought a company a year and a half ago.
So cool. Yeah. I always like to say, I always look for the right things wrong with it. Right? When you look at an organization, just show me the right things that are wrong with it. And then I'm interested, right? I'll look at businesses. I've looked at businesses in the past, and I was taught that years back. Right? If you're looking at a business, you're going to buy it, just make sure it has the right things wrong with it, because you're right. I mean, there's some people who really can get things up and started, but to scale them and then move them to the next level, I mean, there's a technique to that when it comes to it.
There's also advantages coming in from the outside that you get to see things more objectively. So again, we bought a business a year and a half ago. The owner did a fantastic job building up this thing to almost $1 million in revenue. Had like 80 clients, like good broad client base, very sticky. They've been around a long time, like each of them been around a long time, but he could never take a vacation because he was always the first line of defense for client issues. He would do occasional, step in and do the work when it needed to be turned around fast, things like that. In my objective view, I've found with client services are not as important as people think, especially because the clients who ask for those sorts of like night and weekend requests are usually the worst clients anyway, the lowest paying. There's always an overlap, right? Of like they're the clients that need to be fired anyway. So we went in, and it's like, we look at it and it's like, hey, this looks like a good business, but the owner works too much. We tell him to stop working. We get him out in 6 months, and he was so happy. He's taking vacations. He can do his own thing. He gets a bunch of cash, and he gets payments from us and all that stuff. It's like he's got his way. And we at the same time said, we're just going to put in some policies to make it so we don't have to work all day and all night, right? Like, and we lost some small percentage of clients, and then we raised prices by about 30%, and we lost another 10-20% of clients. We're still doing same amount of revenue, better margins now, and like, so all these things, like, they sound scary because we raised prices. I mean, that's like, we could have lost a lot more clients if we, maybe, but like, I was, again, banking on a couple of years of experience with raising prices and just knowing that, like, people don't want to go find a new service provider if you're doing really good work. And they were doing legitimately very good work, and still are. And so I knew that a good portion of these companies were not price sensitive. It was just that the owner never tried to raise prices. And so, again, I could only look at this objectively because each client was a number to me on a piece of paper, whereas for him, it was a personal relationship he had built for years, and I get why that was way harder. So I think there's an advantage to coming in from the outside and having a little more objectivity, even if it is, you have to do some things that, I don't know. Again, a few clients got mad, but very few compared to the overall happiness level.
Yeah, it's funny when you look at that stuff and you're outside in, again, doing the consulting work, it really does. You give a different perspective. So now you buy the podcast consultant, correct? And at that point, what are some of the first things that you did when you came in? You're like, obviously, I mean, probably piggyback off what we just talked about, but obviously raising prices was one of them.
Raise prices, get some established policies.
Did they have a lot of employees? Did they have a lot of employees?
About 10 like part-time, and 10 to 20 part-time, like freelancers, basically.
Okay.
So what we started to do then was take the top 4 or 5 of those people and kind of make them our core team and start elevating their roles and making them own more and more of it. Because what we found is, of course, there's some like fantastic people he had hired that were just out there doing piecemeal work as he sent it to him. And we talked to him. We're like, this guy's great. He could run this whole operation. Yeah. Like, let's get him running it. So like now, when we talk to the team, it's really fun to hear their experience, because they're all like, we weren't sure what to think when these 2 random guys come in, buy this business that they've been freelancing with. They're like, but they were just freelancers. And then we start to like loop them into meetings. We start to tell them what the goals for the company are. We start to like give them quarterly reports on how well we're doing. And they're like, this is cool. Like, we feel like we own this thing, and like, we're in charge of all the projects that make this happen. It's not like Karl came in and said, I'm just going to go make your business better. Karl said, hey, I want to make it better. What do you guys think we should do? And they start to like come up with ideas and start to own those ideas with us. And so I think when you give people, if you can come into an existing business and give people more ownership rather than like take it away and take away the things that they've gotten used to, give them more freedom to run things the way they want, give them more access to information. It's just, you're the best people are going to rise to the top, because that's what they want. They don't want more instructions. They want more autonomy. And so I think that's where we found it's like, the really good group of people. I'm super jazzed about working with them. We continue to every few months, like, elevate what they're doing and how, their roles, and give them more responsibility. And we step back a little more. And it's just been fun to see.
Oh, that's great. That is great. So I'm going to ask you a question. If there's somebody out there right now who is thinking about getting into business for themselves, okay, and they've got again, we talked about this earlier, and you really hit the hammer on that. You got to have a product to sell, obviously. It's something that works. But what kind of advice would you give somebody who has something, they're ambitious, they want to jump into business for themselves, or maybe they're early into their career and moving into that cycle? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think, again, advice, broad universal advice is probably impossible, because every prospective entrepreneur is a little different in what blocks them, right? For me personally, here's what the blocker was. I was always worried. I was always thinking about business ideas up until I started Draft.dev. Okay. Most of them were very grandiose ideas that were really unique and cool. None of them had any interest in the market. And I think what I found is like those big, huge ideas that were really cool and grandiose and would have been in some effect world changing were like a bridge too far. There was too much of a gap between the reality of what I had access to as a new entrepreneur or whatever, and where those would end up for me to fill. But what wasn't too big a gap was for me to become a freelance writer who then starts to hire other freelance writers and then starts to edit their work and then hire editors. That was a very manageable small gap. But
So,
what's
yeah.
cool about it is, again, like if you look at that and you say, oh, I don't want to be a freelance writer, that sounds boring. Like, that's not business for me. But the cash flow from that business and setting that business up well has enabled me to go think bigger and actually build things that could be really, really big. So I think, again, thinking of your first business as this has got to be the big one is the wrong way to think about it. Think about it as, how do I buy myself enough freedom to go figure out the big one?
Yes.
And if you can kind of like humble yourself to that, I think you can do whatever you want, because it's amazing the amount of like the amount of power that a cash flowing business will give you as far as like power over your time and the ability for you to choose your own destiny. It's infinitely higher. So you've really got to focus on that first.
That's such great advice. And I'm reading a book right now called The Psychology of Money. Okay. And you would think, I mean, it does talk a lot about money in the stock market and all this kind of stuff, but actually one of the key, like I'm in the heart of this thing, and one of the key messages is, if you do it right, time is what you get. And it's just what you're talking about. If you can set up your business correctly, actually what you're doing, if you put in the work early and you get the structure and you're tracking and putting everything in place, the freedom is not so much the money, but what's even more, and it's great, believe me, it's great to have money and freedom, but the time to be able to do the things that you want to do. They were talking about the psychology of people who just go to work every day and they're really kind of like just in this business, and and I'm not taking anything away from it. Okay. I mean, everybody, there's places and everybody's fulfilled different ways, but it was really interesting to talk about the psychology of people who have the freedom to do the things that they want to do and how much happier they are personally with their relationships, with the people they work with, I mean, everything and above. And we forget about that. Listen, you've got to put in the time. You've got to earn the right to earn that time.
That's right.
What I say, but you got to put in the time. But if you do it correctly, that freedom aspect of it just opens up your whole being.
It's huge.
It really
there's a concept that Tony Robbins has called modeling, right? Where it's basically like, if you want to become something, say you want to become Warren Buffett, go look at Warren Buffett and 5 or 6 of his peers, people that invest at his level, and see how they spend their time. Who do they hang out with? What do they read? Like, figure out the key things around them. And if you look at the wealthiest or the biggest investors, the whatever, what do they spend money on? Things that buy them more time. That's kind of it. Because it's at the end of it, like you can buy all the shit you want, but like that doesn't really, nobody ever says that made me happy. They all just say like, what did is freedom of time, the ability to clock in when I want, clock out when I want, not work if I don't want, go to this place because I can, go to that place because I can. So I totally agree with that. Like you can figure out how to optimize any small business around maximizing your freedom of time, then you can decide what you want to build from there, right? It's just the possibilities become endless, because then money's just a stair-stepping like function that happens if you're intentionally chasing it. But time is something that like you've really got to work to have freedom from.
Yeah, this has been such a great interview, dude. Listen, I don't say this often, but I want to have you back on the road. I think this would be fun, and I think
you have
a podcast too, right? We're talking about
that's right. Yeah, we'll be doing it again.
Yeah, we're gonna do it again. Okay,
so
good. So we're gonna talk about. But no, this has been. There's so much more obviously to unpack, but to see your journey. So what's next for you? Obviously, you're putting the portfolio together. What's on the horizon for you at this point, and what's your next? What are some of your next moves?
So we're really thinking about, so, again, we've only made one small acquisition. We made a couple offers last year, nothing went through. And then we're really thinking now about how do we build up a ongoing pipeline of businesses to potentially buy in the next 5 years. And so really spinning this up as more of like its own little the business acquisition is its own business itself that does its own functions, has its own team and stuff like that. So we're starting to sort of invest more into that side of things. And then, what'll happen is we'll build up the pipeline of good potential deals coming through. We'll do debt on them. We'll do, some kind of creative financing for some. Then we'll hit a wall and we'll say, okay, maybe we have to go raise money, and we'll go figure out that problem next. So who knows exactly what the tactical little details will be to get there. But it's really about, like, again, you kind of have any big goal, you put one foot in front of the other, and you kind of continue to leap off just slightly bigger ledges over and over again. And eventually you'll get to a point where you can just jump off anything. You just have to continually challenge yourself. So that's where I'm
education, man. It's the education that you really get from it. That is just, again, we talked about it earlier, but it's invaluable, the education that you get and how you can, help yourself and help people. This is an interesting question for you. But I know you read a lot, but what do you do personally, like for yourself on a personal development side?
That's a good question. I probably spend, well, I take that back. I was going to say I spend less time on this, but I just do it. My focus shifts every so many years, right? This last year, this is such a silly goal, but I'll share it just because it's like, I'm kind of proud of it. So last year I was like, I want to get good at doing pull-ups, better at doing pull-ups than the average person, right? I've never been able to do more than 2. Like, I'm a big guy. I'm like 6'5". I weigh 220 pounds. Like, I'm too big to be doing pull-ups, and I'm not that muscular. I'm not like gym rat, So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna work through this. I'm gonna figure out how to do this. And you go find a program, you go figure out this stuff. I start, I'm eating more protein. I'm taking creatine. I'm doing the, whatever, like little things, nothing illegal, nothing crazy, but just like little things. And I go from like 2 to 8, and I'm like, ooh, that's progress. That's like big progress in the relative terms. And I'm like, I'm going to just keep doing this. So anyway, I've been working a lot on that kind of fitness stuff. And just, again, there's a limit to how much time I'm going to spend on it, given constraints of family and running 2 companies. But it absolutely, I do. There is a lot to be said for personal development, especially fitness development, I think, as an entrepreneur, because this is not a 5-year sprint and you're done journey. This is a 30 years of like ups and downs that you have to weather. And so making yourself mentally and physically able to weather a 30-year period of who knows what is way more important than like we're pulling all-nighters all the time, ignoring your health just to like get through 5 years. That is not the way this works. So that's been a really big shift, and it's sort of forced me to like say, okay, I'm going to take the foot off the gas just a tiny bit so I can spend time on my own health and make myself better for the next 30 years rather than just, sprinting through every single day.
It is the thing that has gotten me through the years that I have, and why I have the drive I have, because I'm religious in staying fit. And listen, like you said, it doesn't have to, I'm not a gym rat, like where I got to be there every day for 2 hours, but I grind it out. I mean, I get after it on the time that I'm there. Like this morning, you ever done hot yoga?
I have not. My wife has done that a lot, though.
Okay, right. Well, my wife's actually had studios for years, and it's funny, when I was started with hot yoga, it was more like the physical thing, right? Like, hey, I gotta, I'm gonna do my push-ups and all this kind of stuff, and sweat it out and get in there. And then it turned into a mental thing. Like, can I control my mind? Can I stay focused for an hour and really be focused on myself? And what I think we started talking about today is the control of everything outside of you. And now it's kind of transformed. Yeah, still have to struggle with that, but now it's transformed into the breathing and controlling my breathing, which helps with even situations that can be a little more stressful. So it's interesting, but that's another podcast for us, man. But listen, I have loved having you on this show. I really enjoyed it. It's been a blast.
Same.
We're definitely going to do it again. I'm going to jump on yours for sure. And I'm really looking forward to that. So thanks for being here today, man, and sharing all your experiences and your wisdom. You still have a lot ahead of you, and I'm excited for you in your future.
Thanks, David. This was a lot of fun. I can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, everybody, health, wealth, success to all of you out there. Like this show. Just listen, take the show and just share it with one person. That's all we want to ask, because they're going to get something out of it, especially this one today. It was a fantastic show. I knew going into it. And normally I do like this intro going into it, but we just started rapping, and I was like, I love it. We're going to go with it, man. We're going with it. So thanks for being here again. Also, check us out at salesperformance.com for any companies out there who need, to want to amplify their sales organization, their culture, their execution plan, all that kind of stuff. And we appreciate all your support. Karl, thanks again for being here. We'll see everybody next time. Thanks again.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Sliman.